We've all been there, in conversations that leave us drained, in relationships that confuse us more than they support us, in situations where no matter how much we give, it's never enough. And we tell ourselves to be patient, to be understanding, to try harder, because that's what good people do, right? But what if I told you that outsmarting toxic people doesn't start with being better for them? It starts with being braver for yourself. This isn't about revenge. It's not about playing games, it's about clarity, about learning how to protect your peace without apology, about finally seeing the patterns, rewriting the script, and making one bold move that changes everything. Because the truth is, toxic people don't need to outthink you. They just need you to keep doubting yourself. And the second you stop doing that, the second you take your power back, not with drama, but with decisiveness, that's when the game changes. Not for them, for you. So let's talk about what that bold move looks like. Let's talk about what it really takes to outsmart toxic people and finally walk free. You know what's crazy? Most of us don't even realize we're dealing with toxic people until the damage is already done. That's the real danger. They don't always show up wearing red flags. Sometimes they show up as coworkers who crack jokes at your expense, friends who call it a just being honest while they slowly chip away at your confidence, family members who say they love you, but somehow everything is always your fault. And in relationships, oh, they can be charming, generous, even protective, until they're not. That's how toxicity works. It blends in. It disguises itself. It convinces you that you're the one who's overreacting. That's why outsmarting toxic people doesn't start with confrontation. It doesn't start with some clever comeback. It starts with something far more powerful: awareness. The moment you stop normalizing their behavior is the moment everything begins to change. See, when someone consistently makes you question your worth, your memory, your sanity, that's not love. That's not friendship. That's control, manipulation. And the more you explain it away, they're just stressed. That's just how they are. Maybe I'm being too sensitive, the deeper you fall into their narrative. And make no mistake, toxic people are master storytellers. As storytellers, they're constantly rewriting the truth in a way that keeps them blameless and you confused. That confusion? That's not a bug. That's a feature. That's how they win. But here's the bold move: naming it, saying to yourself, this isn't healthy. You don't have to justify it to anyone else. You don't need permission to see things clearly. You just need to stop denying what your gut already knows. And I get it. That's not easy. Because once you call it what it is, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending it's fine. And that shift, that's terrifying. Because it demands something from you. It demands that you make a decision. Keep the peace on the outside while you fall apart on the inside, or disrupt the pattern and reclaim your dignity. That's the real cost of clarity. But trust me, it's worth it. Most people stay stuck because they confuse familiarity with safety. I've known them forever. They've always been like this. It's just how our family works, but time doesn't validate behavior. Proximity doesn't excuse pain. You can love someone and still acknowledge their knowledge they're not good for you. Not good for you. You can respect someone's position and still see their behavior as harmful. You can be loyal and still be honest. Now, here's what makes this shift so bold. The second you call toxicity what it is, you break the spell. You stop absorbing their energy. You stop dancing around their moods. Dancing around their moods. You stop shrinking just to avoid setting them off. And suddenly, they lose something they never expected to lose: control. Because toxic people don't need you to agree with them. They just need you to stay confused. They need you to doubt yourself enough to keep tolerating the bare minimum. But once you know what you're looking at, you stop playing their game. You stop handing them the pen and letting them write your story. You start asking different questions. Not, why do they treat me like this? But a why am I still allowing it? Not what's wrong with me, but what's wrong with this environment. You go from victim to observer, from participant to strategist, and that shift, that's the foundation of every other move you're going to make. Because until you name it, nothing else sticks. Boundaries don't hold. Silence feels weak. Walking away feels cruel. But once you recognize the behavior for what it is, those same actions become powerful, purposeful, necessary. You're no longer reacting, you're reclaiming. And here's the most powerful truth of all: people who benefit from your confusion will never applaud your clarity. That's fine. That's not your job. Your job is to protect your peace, even when it costs you proximity. Your job is to tell yourself the truth, even if no one else agrees with it. No one else agrees with it. Your job is to make one bold move, and that move is to see it, because the moment you recognize the poison, you stop drinking from the same cup. And that, right there, is the beginning of your freedom. So now you've named it. You've seen the behavior for what it really is. The mask is off, and the confusion is fading. But here's the part that catches most people off guard. Toxic people don't just want to be in your life. They want to control the role you play in theirs. They hand you a script. Sometimes it's the role of the peacemaker. Sometimes the punching bag. The fixer, the follower, the one who always says yes, the one who never asks questions. And if you've been playing that role long enough, it starts to feel like your personality. But it's not. It's a performance, one you've been trained into, often without realizing it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The longer you've been in that role, the harder it is to walk off the stage. Because on some level, it worked. It kept the peace. It kept them from blowing up. It got you validation, at least the scraps of it they decided to toss your way. But at what cost? Here's what I want you to hear loud and clear. Just because someone cast you in a certain role doesn't mean you have to keep playing it. You can refuse the script. You can drop the act. And that refusal, that is your next bold move. See, toxic people survive on predictability. They rely on you doing what you've always done, apologizing first, downplaying your needs, putting their emotions above your own, swallowing your truth to protect their comfort. That predictability gives them power, because they know how to manipulate it. But the moment you say, "I'm not doing this anymore," the whole structure begins to collapse. They don't just want your time or your energy, they want your compliance. That's why breaking the role is so threatening to them. It's not about whether you were right or wrong. It's wrong. It's about the fact that you're no longer controllable. You're no longer a supporting character in their story. You're starting to write your own. And I know, it feels selfish at first, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to how useful you are to other people. But let me be clear. Refusing to play the role someone assigned you is not selfish. It's self-respect. It's reclaiming your identity, your autonomy, your voice. You don't exist to make other people comfortable. You're not here to absorb someone else's pain, just so they don't have to feel it. And the idea that setting boundaries makes you a bad person, that's part of the manipulation. That's the voice of the role trying to pull you back in. Think about it. How often have you found yourself doing mental gymnastics to justify someone's behavior just so you can keep playing your part? You can keep playing your part. How many times have you watered yourself down, stayed quiet, or laughed at something that made you feel small just to avoid the fallout? You don't have to keep doing that. You are allowed to disappoint people who expected you to stay small. You're allowed to say no without explaining yourself. You're allowed to stop rescuing people who never take responsibility. Because your job is not to carry the weight of someone else's emotional immaturity. Your job is to be you fully unapologetically and without asking for permission. And yes, when you step out of the role, people will notice. Some will push back. They'll accuse you of changing. They'll say you're overreacting or that you're not the same person anymore. And they'll be right. You are changing. You aren't the same person. You're growing. You're evolving. You're waking up. The beautiful thing is, once you reject the role, you create space for something real. You start showing up as your actual self, not the version of you they were comfortable with, but the one that's grounded, clear, and aligned. And sure, some people won't like that version, but the ones who matter, the ones who see you, they won't need you to shrink in order to love you. The bold move isn't confrontation, it's transformation. And it starts the moment you stop letting someone else define who you're supposed to be. So if you're looking for the turning point, if you're waiting for permission to rewrite your role, this is it. Right here, right now. Stop playing the part they gave you. Start living the story you were meant to write. Because when you stop fitting into their narrative, you finally start fitting into your own. Now, here's where everything starts to shift, where awareness turns into action. Because once you've recognized the toxic behavior, and you've stopped playing the role they wrote for you, you hit the moment that really defines whether you reclaim your power or fall back into old patterns. It's the moment you draw the line. And I'm not talking about vague boundaries that sound nice on paper but collapse the second they're tested. I'm talking about real, honest, no fluff, this is where it ends kind of boundaries. The kind that bite. The truth is, toxic people don't respect hints. Manipulative toxic people don't respect hints. They don't listen to your tone. They don't respond to subtle gestures or emotional fatigue. If they did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. They test you. They test your patience, your silence, your flexibility. They push and push until they find the edge. And if you haven't made that edge firm, they will walk right over it like it never existed. So the bold move here isn't just setting a boundary, it's being willing to enforce it. That's where most people get stuck. They think, well, I told them how I feel. Okay, but did you follow through when they ignored it? Did you create consequences? Did you stand by your words even when it got uncomfortable? Because boundaries without consequences aren't boundaries, they're suggestions. And toxic people love suggestions. And toxic people love suggestions. Suggestions leave room for negotiation, manipulation, gaslighting. Boundaries with consequences, on the other hand, they change the dynamic completely. They make you unpredictable in all the right ways. And I know that might sound harsh, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that being nice means being endlessly flexible. But there's a difference between kindness and self-abandonment. You can be compassionate and still firm. You can love someone and still say, this behavior is not welcome in my life. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And clarity is powerful. When you set clear, non-negotiable boundaries, you're no longer playing defense. You're building a fence around your peace. You're deciding in advance what's acceptable and what isn't. That way, when someone crosses the line, you don't need to scramble for a response. You don't need to justify yourself. You just act calmly, confidently, consistently. It's not about punishing anyone. It's about protecting yourself. Because here's what happens when you finally enforce a strong boundary. Toxic people panic. They get louder, angrier. Suddenly, you're a selfish. You're a cold. You're not who you used to be. Of course they say that. You've cut off their access to the parts of you they used to exploit. But don't let their discomfort convince you you've done something wrong. Their pushback is confirmation that your boundary is working. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to yell. A boundary isn't a tantrum. It's a decision. One you make without apology, without guilt. Without guilt. And every time you follow through, you reinforce the message. I will not abandon myself to keep this connection alive. Think about that. How many times have you tolerated disrespect just to avoid conflict? How many times have you made yourself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable? That's not love. That's survival. And survival isn't sustainable. Eventually, something inside you breaks, and by then, it's not even about them anymore. It's about the version of you that you no longer recognize. So what if, instead of letting it get to that point, you drew the line now? What if you said, this is where I stop explaining, and you start respecting? What if you backed it up, not with threats, but with actions? Because here's the truth. The right people won't be offended by your boundaries. The right people will appreciate them. They'll honor them. They'll even adopt a few of their own. Healthy people don't get upset when you say, that doesn't work for me. Only those who are benefiting from your lack of boundaries will take it personally. And when that happens, when the fallout begins, don't run back to smooth it over. Let it fall. Let what doesn't belong in your life fall away. Not everything broken needs to be repaired. Not every relationship deserves a second chance. Some connections only survive in the absence of self-respect. But you're not living in that absence anymore. You're here. You're awake. You're aware. And now you're setting the tone for how the world will treat you moving forward. Let them feel the edge of your boundaries, because when they do, They'll finally understand that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. That's how you stop being the victim of someone else's chaos and start being the guardian of your own clarity. By now, you've already done what most people never dare to do. You've recognized the toxicity. You've refused to play the part they tried to cast you in. You've drawn a line in the sand that actually holds weight. But here's where it gets tricky. Because the moment you start reclaiming your power, toxic people don't just disappear quietly. They escalate. They escalate. They provoke. They poke every wound they've learned to exploit. And in those moments, you'll feel the urge to defend yourself, to prove your side, to say, that's not what happened, or you don't get to twist the story like that. That urge is human. But giving into it? That's how they pull you back in. You see, toxic people don't want resolution. They want reaction. They thrive on chaos, especially the kind that distracts you from your progress. If they can bait you into an argument, into shouting, into explaining for the 100th time why their behavior hurt you, then suddenly you're not strong, you're emotional. And in their world, emotional always means irrational. Suddenly the focus isn't on what they did, it's on how loud you got while trying to get them to care. They flip the script and make you the problem. But here's what changes the game entirely. Silence. Not silence as weakness, but silence as strategy. Because silence says, I see exactly what this is, and I'm not playing anymore. It's not that you don't have a response. You do. You just know they're not worth the words. And that restraint, that's real strength. Toxic people don't expect that. They expect you to fight, to flinch, to feed the fire. But when you choose silence, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of strategy, you stop giving them the power to define the moment. And let me be clear. Silence isn't avoidance. It's alignment. It's alignment. It's knowing the difference between a conversation and a trap, between a disagreement and a power struggle. You don't owe anyone the courtesy of responding to manipulation. You don't owe them your peace just because they're trying to hijack the narrative. And you especially don't owe them your energy when all they want to do is drain it. This kind of silence isn't passive. It's powerful. It says, I don't need to yell to be sure of what I know. And when they accuse you of being cold, distant, or dramatic, that's just their way of testing your boundary again. Because the moment you break your silence to defend yourself, they win. They've pulled you back into their world. The world where they always find a way to twist your words and flip the blame. But when you remain calm, when you don't bite the hook, they start to feel their grip loosen. And that's what they fear most. Not your words, not your anger, but your detachment. Because detachment means they no longer control your mood, your worth, your choices. There's a moment, some of you know it well, where you realize you don't even need them to understand anymore. You don't need the apology. You don't need the closure. You don't need the closure. You don't need to explain yourself one more time. That's when silence becomes a statement, not of defeat, but of arrival. It's the moment you walk out of the argument without a scar. Not because they didn't try, but because you didn't let them in. Now I know this goes against everything many of us have been taught. We're taught to speak up, to defend the truth, to stand our ground. And yes, there's a time and place for all of that. But not every battle is worth your voice, especially when it's a trap designed to pull you out of character. You can still be honest, just not on their terms. You can still be strong, just not loud. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is to not engage, because in that space, something powerful happens. You stop fighting for their respect and start protecting your own. And sure, at first, it'll feel unnatural. You'll second-guess yourself. You'll replay the conversation in your head, wondering if maybe you should have said something, anything, just to make your side clear. But eventually, you'll realize your silence said it all. Told the truth more powerfully than any argument ever could. They wanted noise. You gave them stillness. They wanted chaos. You gave them calm. They wanted control. You gave them nothing. And that's how you win, not by shouting over the storm, but by refusing to step into it in the first place. Because the moment you stop giving toxic people your reaction, you start reclaiming your reality. Up to this point, you've made some serious shifts. You've recognized the toxicity, refused the role they wanted you to play, built boundaries that finally hold, and learned the power of strategic silence. But there's one more layer that often goes unnoticed, and it's the one that toxic people rely on the most. It's your reaction. Not the big ones necessarily, but the little reflexes, the flinch when they raise their voice, the way you scramble to fix things the second they start acting cold, the impulse to text back just to keep the peace. That's where the real control happens, not in what they say, but in how you react. Toxic people feed off predictability. They know exactly what buttons to push, and more importantly, they know how you'll respond. It's a cycle they count on. Provoke, wait for your reaction, then use it against you. It's not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, a sigh, a guilt trip, a passive-aggressive jab. They don't even need to win the argument. They just need to get a rise out of you. Because the moment you react without thinking, you give them exactly what they're looking for. Proof that they still have access to you. That's why outsmarting toxic people means doing something they don't expect. Instead of reacting, you respond. Believe, reacting you respond. But not just any response, a calm, clear, intentional one. It's about learning to pause, to breathe, to ask yourself, is this worth my energy? Before you engage. It's not avoidance, it's discipline. It's recognizing that your peace doesn't have to be sacrificed every time someone else is uncomfortable. And look, this takes practice. If you've spent years living in reaction mode, walking on eggshells, putting out fires, anticipating their moods, it's going to feel foreign at first. You might even feel guilty for not reacting. But here's the difference. Reacting is emotional reflex. Responding is emotional intelligence. Reactivity gives them the upper hand. It keeps you locked in the pattern. But a response? That's something you choose. And once you start choosing your responses, you begin to rewrite the dynamic. Maybe that means not replying to the bait text. Maybe it means taking a full day to think before addressing a heated message. Maybe it means calmly saying, I'm not available for this conversation right now, and then actually walking away. Each of those choices sends a message. I am no longer programmable. Because when you're reactive, you're predictable. And when you're predictable, you're easy to manipulate. But when you slow down, when you create space between their action and your response, something incredible happens. You get your power back. You become the one in control of the moment. You set the emotional tone. You steer the outcome. And don't be surprised if they try harder to provoke you once they notice the change. That's just their way of testing your new limits. But here's the key. Just because someone throws a grenade doesn't mean you have to catch it. You don't need to take the bait just because it's dangled in front of you. You get to choose your energy. You get to decide who gets a response and who gets silence. And you get to make that decision based not on their behavior, but on your values. On your values. Because the truth is, toxic people don't just want attention. They want ownership of your time, your emotions, your headspace. And when you stop reacting, you stop giving them a lease to live rent-free in your mind. That space, you reclaim it. You fill it with your own priorities, your own peace, your own peace, your own clarity. And yes, there will still be moments that test you. Moments when your body remembers the old script, when your instinct is to defend, to explain, to fix. But every time you pause, every time you choose intention over impulse, you rewire something inside you. You become more grounded, more resilient, less shaken by other people's storms. You begin to operate from a place of power, not panic. And the beauty of it is, once you build this habit, it spreads. You stop reacting not just to toxic people, but to all of life's noise. You become less easily swayed, less drained, more focused. Your clarity grows. Your self-respect deepens. Self-respect deepens. And suddenly those old dynamics, the ones that once had you spinning, feel small. Powerless. Like echoes from a life you've already outgrown. You're not here to be easily triggered. You're not here to be anyone's emotional puppet. You are here to lead yourself with clarity and to respond only when it aligns with who you're becoming. Because when you replace reactivity with intentional action, you don't just protect your peace, you elevate your entire life. At some point, you come to the edge. You've recognized the toxicity. You've stepped out of the role they boxed you into. You've set firm boundaries. You've embraced silence as your power. You've stopped reacting and started responding with purpose. And then, eventually, it all leads to this moment, the one that feels like the final test. The moment you ask yourself, do I walk away now? Let's not romanticize that decision. It's not always clean, it's not always easy, and it's rarely without pain. Sometimes walking away feels like letting go of years of shared history, of deep connections, of memories that still tug at your heart. It can feel like losing a piece of your identity, especially if you've spent a long time anchored to that person or that space. But here's the truth you need to hear. Some people can only stay in your life as long as you're willing to abandon parts of yourself. And you've done that long enough. Long enough. You've silenced your needs to keep them calm. You've tolerated disrespect under the disguise of a love. You've carried the weight of both people's emotions just to avoid another explosion. And maybe, just maybe, you've even questioned your worth because they made you believe you were hard to love, or too much or not enough. But that wasn't the truth. That was the version they needed you to believe in order to keep the dynamic alive. And once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend anymore. That's when the idea of staying becomes heavier than the fear of leaving. That's when the silence, the boundaries, the intentional pauses, they stop being enough. Because now what's needed is the boldest move yet, choosing yourself completely. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't to speak up or fight harder, it's to leave. Not out of hate, not out of revenge, but because you finally understand that you're worth more than the cycle you've been stuck in. You stop asking them to change. You stop waiting for them to understand. You stop hoping that if you just explain it better, love them harder, or stay longer, they'll wake up and realize what they're doing. And now's what they're doing. That hope, that waiting, that's what's been draining you all along. And yes, there will be grief, not just for the person, but for the version of you that tolerated what you now know was never okay. But in that grief, there's also freedom, because walking away isn't just about creating distance. It's about coming back home to yourself. You start to feel it the moment you cut the cord, the weight lifting, the confusion clearing, the stillness returning. You are no longer tangled in someone else's chaos. You no longer need to decode their moods or explain your worth. You wake up and realize you've got space again, space to breathe, to dream, to rebuild. And people will ask, but didn't you care? Of course you did. That's why it took so long. But caring isn't a reason to stay in a situation that's hurting you. Loyalty means nothing if it comes at the cost of your self-respect. This isn't about giving up. It's about choosing growth. It's about recognizing that not every relationship, no matter how deep, is meant to last forever. Some people are meant to be chapters, not the whole story. And clinging to them out of habit, guilt, or fear only delays the life you're actually meant to live. The people who truly love you, who truly value you, they won't require you to sacrifice your peace to keep them close. They won't punish you for having boundaries. They won't twist your silence into weakness or your distance into betrayal. They'll honor your truth, even when it challenges their comfort. So, you walk, not because you want to hurt them, but because you're finally ready to heal yourself. You walk, not because you're bitter, but because you've run out of excuses to stay in pain. You walk because for the first time you're choosing peace over proximity, dignity over dysfunction, your future over your past. And yes, it's hard. But so is staying somewhere your soul is shrinking. So is waking up every day in a space where you're tolerated but never truly seen. Walking away doesn't make you heartless. It makes you honest. Honest enough to say, this is no longer for me. Because the most powerful move you'll ever make isn't shouting louder, explaining more, or waiting longer. It's walking away like you mean it. And when you do, you don't just leave something toxic behind. You step fully into who you were always meant to become. It doesn't take a fight to reclaim your life. It takes one bold move, one decision to stop normalizing disrespect, one choice to drop the role they assigned you. One moment where you draw a boundary that actually protects some. One breath of silence that speaks louder than any argument ever could. One shift from reaction to intention. And finally, one step away from what's been draining you for far too long. Outsmarting toxic people doesn't require you to be louder, meaner, or more cunning. It requires you to be clear. Yes, clear. Grounded. Brave. Because the boldest thing you'll ever do isn't proving them wrong. It's refusing to let them define your worth in the first place. So if you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Stop shrinking. Stop apologizing. Stop negotiating your peace. And take the bold move that reminds the world exactly who you are. Ask ChatGPT, "Oh,